Good evening, everybody. My name is Jay Sayers, host of FileMaker STL Meetup. And for our April meetup, this month's meetup, Todd Geist is joining us from Proof+Geist. They have a number of products, and Todd and I decided that he should present Otto. I don't want to take up any more time. Todd, I'll let you do any more introduction than that, but it's a pleasure having you, and thanks for being here.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I'm going to share a part of my screen here and we'll jump right in. If there's questions that come up in the chat and I pause, and if somebody wants to surface those questions, I'm happy to take breaks and answer what I can. I might say, well, wait, or something like that. But ideally, I like to kind of keep the questions close to when they come up. I think that helps that everybody's just learning what's happening and what's going on with all the things that we're doing here. So just to quickly, some of you already heard this stuff, and I know many of you for a long time. So and some of you have been in various other seminars and webinars that we've had together over the years. But my name is Todd Geist. I'm the CTO of Proof+Geist, and my connection to St. Louis, many of you already heard. I lived there for quite a bit. I went to Washington University, graduated class of '89 with a degree in chemistry. And I went on to work at the Washington University School of Medicine for about 7 years, doing science research, basic science. And that is where I learned FileMaker. I was in the lab, had a lot of data to keep track of. I also, besides doing the experiments on mutating bacteria and mouse strains, I also ran the lab. So I ordered supplies and tracked supplies and things like that. So I built my first database systems using HyperCard at first, and then a program called Double Helix, which is actually still out there. Helix Express, I think it's called, and then settled on FileMaker sometime in the early '90s. And so I've been doing that ever since. Let's see, what are we going to talk about? So we're going to talk about Otto, and we call it a couple different things. It doesn't fit neatly into a bucket, but one of the categories that we use to talk about what it is DevOps. And so developer operations, so things that automate stuff on the server, things that you might need to do to keep a server running. But that's not it entirely. It also has a lot of runtime features, things that help you build better applications. And so another way to think about it is that it is a FileMaker application server. And if you go to the website, which is ottofms.com, you can see a bunch of more information about it. We call it Superpowers for your FileMaker server, and it goes into a bunch of the things. And I'm going to go through some of this stuff tonight, and we'll do some drawing, and then we'll do some demos, and then we'll see how far we get. And unfortunately I forgot that I was out most of last week and was unable to prepare any of the demos that I wanted to show on the new version of Otto, which will be coming out sometime in the next quarter or two. But if we have time, I will talk about some of the goals of that redesign, because one of the things that's pretty interesting about Otto is that Otto runs on about 1,000 servers, which is a pretty big number, and that's across companies that just have 2 servers and just want to do development and production and migrate their developer files to their production server, to large SBAs that have 12 servers or 24 servers, and they want to, they need to manage that. They need to manage their migrations and various other backups and types of things that Otto helps them do. And then we also run a hosting platform called Automatic, and Automatic is essentially, if I get a chance, we'll maybe look at it a little bit at the end, but really it's sort of your FileMaker server in the cloud, and you don't have to manage it, and it includes Otto. So that's part of the price of Automatic, is it just has Otto installed on it. And so combining all that, we have over 1,000 servers that are running this, and we've seen a lot of use cases over the years, different things that people want to do on their server and with their servers, and we've tried to build in things that make sense to be part of what we think a FileMaker server should have. And so one of the things that's happened, say, in the last 5 years. So Otto actually just a couple days ago, April 18th, I happened to notice that, April 12th, 5 years ago, was the first commit on what became Otto. So it's now 5 years old that we've been doing this, and just a lot of time and effort and use cases and fixing different bugs and just tracking a bunch of stuff. And that was just April 12th that happened, which was kind of interesting. I happened to notice that it was 5 years ago. I was like, wow, we've been doing this a while. And that is actually part of the reason why we're building a new version of Otto, because we now know, like I would say, now we know how to build really what Otto should be. Like in the beginning, we were doing a lot of discovery and just figuring out what this was and what we could do. But the main thing, I want to talk for a second about what this is, what's a application server and what's different, say, in the last 5 years. Really now, when I started building FileMaker, we had a lot of monoliths, right? Monolithic applications, big, large, complex solutions that ran whole businesses or large chunks of businesses, that ran, whole companies, kind of thing. And we didn't have a lot of integration, or if it was kind of limited. But now that's not really true. So that was kind of, the old way, right? The new way now, what's really come about with the rise of the internet is that what we're really doing is building things into a large network of applications, right? And so we're integrating with other apps that live in the cloud, that live in the cloud, right? And so one of the keys to this is, if your other apps are talking to you in the cloud, your FileMaker server needs to be accessible. So it needs to be something that is available for other apps to talk to it. It needs to be up and running, and it really shouldn't go down, or shouldn't go down a lot. And when you do need to do things like data migrations, those data migrations should be done quickly and smoothly, so that you're not disconnecting your application from the rest of the internet ecosystem. And so that's why we talk about this thing in terms of an application server, because it's another way to say it might be that FileMaker is kind of a weird still holdover to the old days of desktop computing. And really, without a server, the number of use cases that FileMaker that are useful today is pretty low. So one of the ways we talk about this is that innovation is on the server, right? And so we've seen this happen with how FileMaker has evolved over the last 5 years, especially. How many new things, how many new capabilities are being added to the server, whether it's PSOS or data APIs or OData or all the various things that now happen on the server, the increase in scale and the increase in number of connections. All this stuff is really about making sure the server is up and running and available so that your applications can run on it. And then a lot of the things that you want to build are going to be on the cloud somewhere, right? You're going to have integration with other apps. You might be making web apps that connect to your FileMaker server. So it's no longer the file, it's now the server. The server is kind of the rock solid piece that you need to build your applications on top of. And that is what Otto started out as being, as a way to improve that. And then we continue that through with Automatic by just sort of having a managed offering as well, if you don't want to run your own servers. But that's the main. So that's the main sort of our focus and our driving goal behind Otto is this idea that innovation is on the server, and we need to add new things to the server to make it more able to fit into the modern ecosystem, or the modern universe of how we build applications. So let's talk about some specific features, and then we'll actually demo some of them. So the one that most of you probably know about or have heard about is data migration. So how many people have used the data migration tool? I don't know if you can raise your hand or make a signal with you. Can you? I think even if you're not showing your camera, you can react. Is that true? So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up here. So for those before the data migration tool became a thing, upgrading a FileMaker solution, a large one, could take an entire weekend, and it would be a bunch of scripted data imports that would go on forever. When the data migration tool came about, which was, I want to say, either 16 or 15, that allowed the actual data transfer to go much faster, but it still didn't solve a lot of the problems that you wanted, or it didn't complete the solution. It was only sort of the enabling piece. But what we really wanted to do was fully automate the process so that you could develop on a development server, and when you're ready, you could push it to production. And so that's one of the big things that Otto enables, is we can have a dev server and a prod server, and we can automate the pushing, the movement of the files from the dev server to the production server, and do that data import all automatically. And so we're going to do one of those in a second. But the basic idea is that the production server asks the dev server for clones. And the dev server says okay, and it sends those clones over to, well, actually it's the production server is fetching them. Once the clones are on the production server, the production files are closed down, and the data migration happens here. Happens on prod. And then when the data migration is over and everything is done, files are opened. And this is all set up so that at the push of a button, you can do this process. And for solutions, depending on the size of the systems and depending on the amount of data in it, this can be just a few minutes to really. I know people who have 80 gigabyte files, and they take it, I think, 90 minutes or so on their systems to do a data migration. But that's the longest that I've heard of. The other thing is that different data migrations can actually take a bit longer, depending on the kinds of changes you've made. The data migration tool decides intelligently whether it can do sort of a fast shortcut data migration, or whether it needs to go row by row or field by field. So instead of taking all weekend to do it, it can now take minutes. And so we have especially our SBA customers who tell us, this is just a game changer, because instead of having to push out new versions to their servers manually, maybe over a weekend, which means you're only going to do it every so often, they can do it pretty much whenever they want. They schedule a window and they can do it. And usually the system's only down for minutes to, at the most an hour, and then the system is back up. So that's one of the things about how it keeps itself, how FileMaker Server stays connected to the rest of the ecosystem out there on the internet, because it's just not down. So you're not having to take the files down from production, put them on your local machine, take your clones, put them on your local machine, do some kind of data migration, transfer the files up, and do all that stuff. All that takes time. And in fact, that's one of the secrets is we don't move data. Moving data is now the longest part of a data migration. So we don't want to move it off prod. Right? Does that make sense? We don't want to move it off prod because data transfer is what's slow. So as long as the data migration is happening right there, the clones pop over from dev, they land on production, the data migration happens, the files just reopen. And if you only have one disk, we don't even have to, there's not even any copying between disks. It's all really, really fast. If you're using multiple disks for your FileMaker server and you've got a backup directory, or some of your files are hosted in a different disk, then you might have to, it's going to be slightly slower, but not really not comparable to actually having to transfer files down from the server and back. So quickly, let's just list out a couple of the other things, and then we'll go to some demos here. I think the other one, which we'll work our way towards, I think that'll be another one I want to talk about here, and we'll fill in the rest later, is webhook receiving. So who's integrated with some kind of third-party system that publishes webhooks? Right, so you've got a webhook coming out. QuickBooks does it, for example. Lots of things do it, where it sends a post request to something, and then that something has to deal with that message, right? So we just think that FileMaker Server should be able to handle webhooks. Like, there should just be a way that you can just say, here's a URL, and it should just be able to handle, you take that URL, you take some kind of API key, you put that into that QuickBooks webhook UI or whatever it is, Stripe or Twilio or whatever, and the FileMaker Server should just be able to handle that. Like, you shouldn't need to make a web app. You shouldn't even really need something like Zapier or Connect to do that. It should just be kind of part of this FileMaker application server. So we're going to try to get to some of that as well. So that's DevOps. That's some DevOps stuff. And then we're going to try to do some application stuff here as well. Let me stop there.
It looks like we did get one question just a couple minutes ago. And it's in the chat. Steven asks, how much post-migration business logic scripts do you find users need?
Yeah, so we can get to this maybe I'll point out where these post-migration scripts are. Every migration is going to be different, and some will require a post-migration script and some won't. And so what a post-migration script is data migration only handles, what's the way to say it? Field to field, like mappings, right? If you have to do something that, if when you want to ship a new version to your production server, and the example I always use is, let's say for whatever reason you had a full name field, and now you want to migrate to you want to switch that out so that it's first name and last name, right? So maybe you want to get rid of the full name field and split it out into a first name and last name. Well, there's absolutely no way for I was going to say no way, period. But now that ChatGPT is around, I don't know. Maybe it could infer that you're getting rid of a full name field and splitting into two and figure out all the logic. But typically, prior to that, I would have said that really you have to tell something that this field has data in it, and that data is going to have to be split in a certain way, split by the space, and put first name in the first name field and last name in the last name field. And that is not something the data migration tool can handle on its own. And so the answer to that is what we call a post migration script. And what a post migration script can do is it's a script that runs at the end of the migration, which sounds, pretty standard. Runs at the end after the data is migrated. And is an opportunity for you to do any scripted logic to fix things up. Scripted logic to handle what the migration can't. And I'm not going to worry a lot about typos here. I apologize if you're one of those folks who who has a hard time. I get it, but I'm trying to type fast, and I don't want to. I may miss some, so I hope you'll just forgive me if I leave out some, if I don't fix all the typos. But that's post migration scripts, and it really depends. Like, you may do migrations for weeks that don't require any post migration scripts, and then one day you decide you're going to really restructure how your data is set up. Like, you're going to normalize a table, split it out into a couple tables. You're going to be doing a lot. You're going to have to write a very complex data migration script that does that. That answer the question, Stephen?
Yeah, good enough for now. Yeah.
Good. All right. So what is Otto? Otto is a service. Otto is an app that runs on your server. It's got an installer. You run it on Mac, Windows, and Linux. There's installers for each platform. And once you install it, it runs on your server, and it looks like, here's Otto running on a Linux server. And so it's got a web UI that has a bunch of other features on it, part of which is migration, which I'll cover in a second. But first, let me just go through some of these other things. So there's a couple just sort of useful things that aren't in the current data, current admin console that we've added, and some things that make it a little bit easier. Like, you can disable the default backup here. That gets set up by FileMaker Server now. You can see clients and databases, which you can see on the admin console. There's some extra configuration. You can toggle PHP and XML off here, and these are some of the things. We're going to be adding a lot more. There's a lot more stuff in the admin API can do now. So we'll be creating UI for those things that aren't exposed in the admin console as part of Otto V, other than the new version of Otto V4. We've also got this log viewer. We like this log viewer quite a bit. We think it's quite nice, and it also includes the FileMaker log, and it has a search feature as well. So for all of these logs, event access, and then there's the Otto ones, you can actually do searches for things like what happened when the proxy was off, and it'll highlight it or actually reduce it down to just those things. So you can see that right there. That's kind of nice. Another one we're going to get to, so I don't want to do that. Another one we're going to get to is, well, here's the file manager. You can upload and download files right from the documents directory, the HTTP docs, FileMaker backups. You can grab them from here. You can also, because Otto knows how to migrate. Oh, I don't think I have any. Do I have any files in here? Yeah, I do. So you can also, you can actually restore a file you can actually put this file right back up, make it live. If you do a migration and you want to undo it, it's right there. You can just put it immediately back up live, or you have corruption or something, the file crashes. You can just grab a backup and just right from here, just make it live immediately. S3 backups, you can have offsite backups set up configured. If you have an S3 bucket, you can set that up to send a set of files to that once a day. Let's take a look at migration. So I'm going to leave the migrations up and let me open up some FileMaker files here. A copy of LedgerLink, which is one of our other products that's running on our production server, on dev server, sorry. Here's that. And let me grab another one, which is running on production. So we'll do a simple migration between these two servers, so you can kind of just get a sense of how it works. And let's see, let's just keep this pretty easy. We'll just make a change to a layout, but remember that any change that you make to the file is going to get pushed over, and the fields, when they line up, either by name or if there's no name ID, no name match, first by ID actually I should say, and if there's no ID match, it'll try to match by name. And so that data migration happens, but you can make any changes to scripts, changes to layouts. And so we'll just put something like new label on here, and I don't know, we'll make it something that sticks out. Maybe something that's easy to see. All right, we'll just change colors. Bright red, there we go. So we've made a change to the file. This will just be the easiest and fastest way to see it. But again, any change to the file will be propagated to the production database. So now we want to set up a migration. We've got Otto running on this. This is our production server. We've also got it running on our Windows, on our dev server, which is Windows. And I guess I'll go ahead and log into this as well. So we're logged in on both places. You can see in the databases, it's gonna list the files here. We've got LedgerLink, that's the file we just had open. You can tell it's got one client there. And then on production, we have the same thing, and you can see it's got one file. So we've got LedgerLink in both places. So we're gonna set up a migration using the migrator file. I've entered one of my servers, which is the production server here, and I'm going to go ahead and enter our dev server so we can get that set up. So it's demo-win.automatic.cloud port 3030. That looks correct. It wants the credentials. This is the admin console credentials. We're getting access to the server, so to speak, and it is gonna connect up. We will call this, what are we calling this? We're calling this dev. And we'll just call it user group for client. All right, so we've got a dev, we've got production. So let's make a migration. Oh, sorry, I need to switch to migration. So let's make a migration. So we're going to choose a from server, and that is going to be our dev server. We're going to choose a to server, and that's going to be our production server. Notice here that you can actually have more than one production server. So for people with vertical market solutions, this is great because they can actually push one file set out to multiple servers with a single setup. And then once you've got it set up, you can just run that whenever you need to. The account name for the files is admin in this case, and admin. Hopefully I'm typing that correctly. There's no encryption keys. And let's choose some files. So we're going to be choosing files from the development server, from the from server. So I'm going to choose LedgerLink. That's the one we were looking at. But I'm also just going to choose a couple more of these just so we can do a multi-file migration. It gives you the list of files here, and then you can do a couple different things here. So this is, you can migrate or you can copy. Sometimes you have files that are only reference data. There's no actual changes in them. There's no cloning, like you could think maybe a zip code table Now, remember we used to have files that had zip code, and that's all they had in them. Those days are long over now that we have all these, integrations with address providers. But things like that, where you might have files that, or a UI file is another really good example, where you might there's no data in it, so you're just pushing a copy over, where the data that's in there is about the user interface. It's not data having to do with the actual system. So you can copy or you can migrate. You can also override these options that are set here for the passwords, and also the options here. We've got a bunch of different options. I won't go into all of them, but these are all the available different sort of things that the data migration tool can do. So the really useful one is the accounts. So you can choose where your accounts come from, whether it's the from server or production in this case, which is normally what you want. You want your production accounts to be there, and whatever accounts you're using in development, you don't want those to come over. So what the data migration tool will do is, if you choose the from server here, it'll actually pull those accounts in. It's like there's a couple places where schema code is overwritten, and I don't know whether, accounts are sort of technically schema. In other words, they're not something that you can export and import normally, but the data migration tool can handle that for you here. So we're going to leave most of these set up the way they are. Like I said, you can override any of those settings at the file level if that was the case. You can also put in some labels and some comments, demo migration, whatever you like, and then you're set to go. So I'm going to kick this off by pressing this button here. We can schedule migrations to go happen at a later time. In this case, I'm just going to go right away. And this is that post migration script that we want to actually do something afterwards with custom logic, that we might have to populate tables in a new way, or change how data is stored, set defaults, those kind of things. Whatever you might need to do, that would run there. 19.6 has this really great feature where cloning is almost instant. So we used to have to work around the cloning taking a long time, but with 19.6, it's really wild. What it appears that FileMaker Server does is, the file is in memory, right? Because you've loaded the schema into memory, and in cloning now on the server, it appears to just write the schema from memory directly to the disk. So it's like, even the largest file I can find takes 7 seconds to clone, which is pretty great. So we're ready to go. I'm going to kick this off, and if I've entered my passwords correctly, our migration is going to happen. Now, one of the things it's going to do is it is going to ask me to close LedgerLink on the production file. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And the development files can stay open because it's going to make a copy and a clone of it in the background. So that's this file here. It's just staying open, but I'll move it out of the way. The other thing to see is, if we look at our production server, we should have a migration underway here, and we can actually look at it. And so it's now working through those files, doing the data migration for you. And it looks like it's setting permissions correctly, starting to open files, and it should be done here in a second. Now, these files are pretty lightweight, and I'm using them to demo because otherwise we would sit here watching dialogues for some time. Most of the solutions that we work with, we're not talking about tens of minutes here. We're talking about 5-10 minutes. For most migrations, are pretty quick. It just doesn't, the file is not available for less than 15 minutes, almost all the time. If you have big systems, that's not going to be the case. It might be 30 minutes, and in the largest systems, it could be an hour. Like I said, the longest that I know of is about 90 minutes for very large files with a lot of schema changes that require the not shortcut data migration. You get some nice, the FileMaker system will come back and say everything's done here, and there it goes. Okay, it's done. Now it pulls the results in here, and you can look at them here. So here's the data migration results that you can see. But another way to look at the results is in the data, is in the UI here. You can look at, it gives you file by file details about what happened. So in this case, the files were closed properly, because they may not, like somebody may like not let a file close. Something could get stuck. You could have FileMaker Server sometimes has these ghost connections that you can't kick out. You have to basically restart server. And so the file might not close. And if the file doesn't close, it just kills the migration. It doesn't go forward. So you'll see that all here, whether it's migrated or copied and whether it opened successfully. And if you want, you can drill into more of the details here, or you can look at a migration log, which looks at each file. You can see the timing, how long it's taking. So this tells you sort of what's happened in that migration. Let me stop there, ask questions. Robert's got a question.
Hi, Todd. Thanks. Just a quick thing, two things actually. Any special ports that would need to be open or anything aside from that? And the second one would be Otto itself doesn't care. It doesn't require to be run with a FileMaker user that is full access. It can be another, as long as
that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Good questions. So you can see up here, port 3030 is the port that needs to be open. And if we get time, I can talk about one of the major changes that we're trying to do with Otto v4 is to get rid of the port requirement. It's a pain. It's actually this is pretty hard to do because we have to integrate with. There are now 3 web servers that FileMaker uses: Apache on Mac, Nginx on Linux, and 2IS on Windows. And we need to be able to integrate direct, basically plug Otto into that web server so that we can get rid of this this port requirement, because it's a big problem that people have. But the other thing to know about that is that these servers have to talk to each other, right? Like this path has to be available over the internet through those URLs over port 3030. And so a lot of the challenges that people have is they don't have firewalls don't have 3030 open, or they have a FileMaker server running inside a network and a FileMaker server running in the cloud, and that inside server doesn't have a public IP or URL. And so we're working very hard with Otto v4 to remove some of those things to make it even easier to get Otto set up and running. In the UI that we showed here, right, I used the full access account. So data migration will work with full access account. However, there is an extended privilege called data migration, which you can use instead. So you can have an account and password set up that only allows data migration, and that is the recommended approach if to doing this. Is if you do that, even if the password gets out, it can't do anything but migrate files. It can't open the file. It can't run any scripts. It can't do anything. So that's the best way to do it, is to use that special data migration privilege set.
How does that work with post-migration scripts? Does that?
Well, so post-migration scripts you'd have to run. So those get set up with a password and account.
Okay.
And the way we do that is actually through we actually create a schedule through the data API, through the admin API, and then run that schedule. And so just like if you're setting up a schedule, a script schedule on FileMaker Server, you have to enter in a username and account for that. Robert, again, new question?
Yes, sorry. You showed us the setup for the servers, where you can have many dev server, many production servers. But technically, if you are in a situation where you have a single server, and understanding that you can't have 2 files with the same name on the same server, but you could technically use Otto to do a migration within the same
right.
server.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Otto doesn't really know that they're 2 servers, so it still treats it like this. But it doesn't know that the dev server is different than the production server. It's just going to call out to a dev server. The dev server happens to be the production server. It'll work. Now the caveats are that if you're going to need to change names, obviously, and if you change names and you have a multi-file solution, you will break your file references. between those files. And so you'll have to use dynamic file references to do that. And that can be a little bit tricky to set up. We actually are about to publish a blog post on how to do that. So watch our website for dynamic file references. They are a necessity if you're going to be changing names as you do that migration. And you can see in the migrator tool that we have here, we have this in the files, you can change the names, right? So you could have LedgerLink dev here and LedgerLink prod here, and that would work. It links up those two together. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Another thing we're going to try to do with Otto v4 is to basically just make that, or actually even make that simpler, but also make the case of, hey, I just want to download this file to my desktop. I'm going to make a couple of changes, and then I'm going to migrate it back up to production. Make that very simple use case way easier, because right now we actually it's sort of challenging to do that with our current setup. The file has to be available somewhere on the internet, and we're going to add another source location, which will be your computer. So if you have the file on your desktop, you can actually essentially link it up here as the thing you want to be the dev file. That makes sense? Oh my gosh, we are just running out of time. I do want to talk about a couple of things, but this is the big feature. So I want to make sure that if people have any questions about migration, that we surface those. Anything else?
Obviously, you don't want to change you're not moving data, so you can't change the data, but are there restrictions on what you can and can't do in terms of data table changes? You don't want to, delete fields, adding fields, those sorts of things.
You can do anything so the rule is that FileMaker will try to map those fields based on the IDs first. And if there's no ID field, if there's no ID match, it'll try by name. And if there's no name, then there won't be a match for that field, and the field will be empty on the other side, right? So that's why you need that data migration, that post-migration script to deal with any of those cases, because you might have a situation where you're creating a new field and you're going to populate data from the old fields into it, but you need to do that after the migration because that's where the data is, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then just a real practical question. I do nonprofit work, and so I'm intrigued by the column that says free.
Yeah. So
what's the limitation on migration?
There is a free version. It does not do migrations though. Okay. It has a reduced set of features, which are listed on that, at least somewhat on that page. And you can send us an email at support@proofgeist.com if you need clarifying questions on that. Anything clarified on that. We do have a 20% discount for nonprofits. Also, that coupon will give you 20% off. So there's that. You've got that in place. Robert.
Thank you, Todd. Just one more thing, and not asking for anything that you cannot share, but because we know that Claris Pro is on the horizon.
Great question. Thanks for bringing that up.
Can you speak?
Yes. So currently Claris, the migration tool does not function on the .claris files, but they just haven't done it. It's just, so the .claris file format is really very similar to it's really the same. It just has a couple of extra features. And so there's a new name and a couple of different things in the file, and they need to make the tool be able to do that. And it's not available yet. It will be, and it will work. We also expect to be able to migrate from FileMaker servers to Claris servers, and also to FileMaker cloud servers as well, with the new version of Otto, which is something we can't do currently. So the goal for Otto is that wherever your servers are running, and by the way, Otto not only runs on our automatic platform, but there are a couple of other hosting providers that also run Otto. It's part of their platform. They license it from us, and they run it on their servers as well. So our goal is that Otto enables migrations between on-prem, cloud, private cloud, FileMaker Claris cloud, your particular FileMaker hosting solution provider. It'll run wherever it needs to run. That's it. I want to jump to really quickly talk about webhook receiving. And I think I've got a quick demo. Before we do that though, let's actually prove that the file got migrated, huh? Why don't we do that? Let's open up that ledgerlink file on production here. And we see that new label just like we do on this file here. So this demo file, this from the dev file, is now this file. So just to really sink this point home, there's no patching going on here. There's no like scripts only getting transferred or fields only. The entire file moves to production and the data is shoved into it at super high speed. That's how it works. All right. Let me see if I can get through this webhook receiving thing pretty quickly here.
One quick clarification.
Yep.
Is there any parity required between OS platforms?
No.
Does Otto work across platforms?
Yes.
Cool. Awesome.
Yes. And like I said, we hope to be able to do not only platforms, but FileMaker server to Claris server. Like that thing we hope to be able to do. And Claris has told us that that's probably going to be not an issue. They just haven't actually got that. Somebody's got to sit down and make that data migration tool handle those different cases. Okay, Robert, another question. We may never get to webhooks here at this rate, but let's do it.
Just one small thing, because we just talked about the versions and platforms. The version of the data migration tool that is being used is the one that sits on the production server. So it goes with the version of the server. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, originally we installed our own version of, we would install the data migration tool for you. 19.4, I think. One of the 19s added the data migration tool to the server. So it's installed, which was great because we did have incompatibility problems between the data migration tool and the server version. It was a pain for us to manage, and now we don't have to because the data migration tool is installed on the FileMaker server by FileMaker Servers installer. Okay, so webhook receiving. So like I said, we want to make webhooks super, super easy to use. We just want to be able to get a URL, get some kind of authentication, plug it into that system, and be able just to send that data to a FileMaker file. That's what we mean by webhook receiving. So I've got a pretty simple demo here, which I hope will make that case. And if we get a chance, we can talk more about the more complex cases. So I've got a file here, and it's got, besides this auto receiver, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's got a students database and a donations database. And I'm thinking about my school days at WashU. So we're doing students and donations because I get a lot of letters from WashU wanting me to give them money. So that's there. So the idea being that new donations and new student records come from some other system that we don't control, but we need to get that data when it gets into our system, and then it has to happen somehow, right? So how do we make this really easy? So webhook receiving is covered in the Otto docs here, and you can look up webhooks here in our documentation. Our documentation is pretty thorough. It's got good search. It should have most of the things that you will come across, but this talks about what you have to do to your FileMaker file, which is not much. Basically, what we've done here is we've added a layout called auto receiver. It doesn't even care what the table name is. It's just looking for that layout name. And then it needs at least two fields on a layout, channel and payload. That's the only thing. So what we can do here is it talks here about what you have to do to make that work. And where's the one I'm looking for here? I guess it's basic auth. So the basic idea is that your URL, you can use, for authentication, use something we have built into Otto, which is called API keys. API keys are great because they make the data API much easier to use. The problem with the data API is you have to authenticate into it. You get this token, it lasts for 15 minutes. If you don't use it, it expires and you have to authenticate again. So when you're dealing with third-party systems, you would really rather not put in credentials that are real. You'd rather put in something like an API key, and Otto has that. And you can see that here in our in the UI here, we have I've already created an API key for the webhook demo file. So I have put in the username and password for that file, and it has given me this key here, which I can use instead of that username and password. And whenever if I suspect something's happened to that third-party system and I want to just get rid of it, I want to disconnect it permanently, I just need to delete it here, and I will never expose my username and passwords to that third-party system. So that's one step to webhooks. We get our API key. And then I'm going to bring up Postman here because it's just the easiest way to send a webhook-like thing to our system. And so we can look at what that looks like here. All right, so here we go. So let's look at this URL. Can I make this, where'd Otto go? I can, beautiful, awesome. I can make this UI bigger. So if you look at this URL, I didn't have to create anything. I just can construct the URL based on what I want. I want to send data to this webhook demo file, which has got our students and our donations table in it. So this is the URL to my Otto. I put in receiver, I put in the name of the file, and then this section is the channel. And the channel is just like, what is this thing that I'm sending? And I've just put a key in here, WashU student new. So I'm saying, I'm going to send a message to this file. The channel is going to be WashU student new, and the payload is going to look like this, first name, last name, right? Whatever third-party system you're using is going to have something, a place for you to plug in your URL. That would be this. In this case, I'm using the API key as a parameter, a URL parameter. You can also do it as a bearer token if you'd like, and it will do this. It'll work just the same. So this is telling what file I want to send my data to, and this is saying what channel I want to send that data to. And then if in our FileMaker file, we have a field for channel, and we have a field for the payload. So good. Everything's so good so far. So what Otto is going to do based on this is it is going to send this data to this layout, and then it's going to run this auto receiver script. That's the only integration that you need to do to make your solution work with Otto. Basically, you're probably going to add a table called inbox or webhooks or something. That table is going to have payload and channel, and then you're going to have a script called auto receiver, and you're going to have a layout called auto receiver. Your script is going to branch based on the channel, and that's it. That's the whole thing. That's the entire sort of all the rules you need to know to get webhooks to work with inbound webhooks to work with your system. So in this case, you can see that if the channel is WashU student new, it's going to run this script called new student. You can imagine what that's going to do. It's going to get the payload. It's going to go to the layout where the students are. It's create a new record. It's going to do all those things. So let's go look at the students table. See, we've got no records. Let's do our send here. We're going to get back to success is true. The message was accepted. And you can see we have a record now in our table that is that's got that data in it. That is really it. That is as simple as you can imagine, like the simplest possible way of getting data from a third-party system into your FileMaker system. Really, mostly just using your own FileMaker skills. Once you have Otto on the server, once you understand how to craft, how to get an API key, and how to indent this URL, you can have webhooks just flowing into your system Just like that. Questions, comments?
Yeah, Todd,
I'll
so
go first.
just so I understand, really what Otto is doing there is not particularly complicated, right? It's waiting for a message and then it's responding or posting through the API to
right.
FileMaker, right?
It's not hard. In fact, before
Yeah, it's okay.
Otto, what we used to do is we would write little API servers,
Right.
write a
Yeah,
little, because what we want is the URL. We want this URL to be, we don't really want to post directly to the FileMaker through the data API to the FileMaker system for the two reasons I talked about, or one reason I talked about, one I didn't. One is I don't want to use my I don't want to put my actual username and password in that third-party system. I just don't want to do that. And if you're going straight to the data API, you will have to do that. So what Otto, and then the other thing is you don't necessarily want to expose the student, that FileMaker data API URL, which exposes the database name, the layout name, all those things that you may not, again, you don't necessarily want to put into that third-party system. So this is a URL that is meaningless outside. Like there's no way for anybody to look at this URL and hack at your database in some way because there's nothing except to post webhooks. That's the only thing it can do. And you want those systems to be able to post webhooks. That's the whole point, is to be able to do that, but it's very tightly constricted. So what we did is Otto is running Node.js. That's the whole thing is built on Node.js, and we can make routes. We can make API routes, and so we make one that looks like this, and it knows this is the file name, and it knows this is the channel, and it knows this is the API key. So it can authenticate to the file, use the data API key, and post it. That's what it's doing. Before Otto, we would basically write one for every client or system, and that was just silly. Like there's just no reason to do that. Or we'd use something like Zapier. But then you've got, again, it's sort of a dependency and that issue to deal with. And those are fine. Like Connect and Zapier are fine solutions. And in fact, we will probably make a connector for Otto's webhook receiver that we can put into Connect whenever they give us that CDK. So I'll make that just one step easier. But it's pretty simple to do, but to do it consistently and easily and without having to recreate the wheel every time, this is what we came up with.
Hey Todd, it's Brad. I know the silence in demos like this is different than the applause that you would normally get somewhere else, but really this is phenomenal work, and I'm going to thank you in advance for doing all this, because this is like one of the most useful things I think I've ever seen.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I just wish I was able to show you some of the new stuff. We've got a lot more interesting things coming because again, it's this idea we want to make the FileMaker server do the things it needs to do. It shouldn't require you writing an API server to receive webhooks. The FileMaker server as an application platform should just receive webhooks. That's our opinion on it. And so we're just making that. And there's it should also do offsite backups, right? So anything that we think it should do that Claris isn't doing for whatever reason, and sometimes they have good reasons for not doing them, we're going to do it and we're adding it to it, that kind of thing.
Very cool.
So your current operations using the data API, do you think you'll ever use OData versus that at some point?
Possibly. OData does help a little bit because it doesn't require this token dance. You don't have to, because with the data API, you have to log in and get a token. With OData, you just use the username and password. So that gets, that's one thing that the auto proxy and the API key handles, is it manages that re-authenticating your token whenever it expires and things like that. But you actually still might not want to expose your actual passwords to a third-party system. So we should probably, one of the things that we've talked about doing, I think we will do it, is we'll make a proxy for the OData endpoint as well. So instead of going you go through 3030 in this case, the new system won't have a port. It'll have, everything will be /auto will be the, you'll be FileMaker server /auto, and then all of Otto's things will be after that. So we probably should do an OData one as well. Makes sense to do that. The other interesting thing is that XML has now been undeprecated, sort of. So, XML has potential because it's not metered. Now, inbound stuff doesn't matter, which is what webhooks are, is posting. So webhooks are inbound data is not metered, but outbound data is metered for both OData and webhooks, but the XML gateway isn't. So what can we do there? I don't know. We'll see.
As a poster child for finding all the obscure webhooks out there that do not like 3030.
Yeah. There are some, and there's a couple so it's not just the ports. There's other edge cases that we don't handle super well right now, which is one of the reasons we're redoing it.
Yeah.
The port is one. Some companies only do port 80 or port 8080. They just have a few ports that they allow: 443, 8843, things like that. So that's a pain. We're gonna resolve that. But there's others too. Like sometimes you have to, like the first webhook that comes in has to be responded to in a certain way, and so we're going to enable that as well, so that you can do these validations. Sometimes the webhooks have to be validated, and that's a bit tricky with our current system.
Is that like a HMAC digest or some kind
something
of
like that? Exactly. You have to get access to the headers, and we're not giving you access to the headers right now. And so that's one thing. Like right now, we have channel, in the auto receiver, we just have channel and payload. We're gonna add the headers to this, so you can see that digest and you can validate and that kind of thing. The other thing that we're doing here is we're going to allow you to get a public URL for an on-prem server that's behind a firewall. So this is what I was hoping to show you, but it's just not quite ready. But if you have even running on your own FileMaker, your own laptop behind a NAT on your own home with no external IP address, Otto is going to be able to install an agent which will give you a public URL, kind of like ngrok or one of those tools that you can use to make your FileMaker server or the Otto API available to the world. So good, again, for webhooks, but also good for migrations and things like that, where the FileMaker server is behind a firewall.
So one of the things that like Korn talked about was this disable or this decoupled thing. And that's
so
comes into play, and I think that's
right.
I'm just starting to jump in on that, and it's actually working really well.
So simple queue is interesting. So simple queue is this this webhook receiver thing. So simple queue is we kind of did. Whoops, what happened there? I did something funky. Simple queue is like what I just showed, but with a bunch of other features on it. And so simple queue it's like the advanced version of what we just looked at. But what simple queue does is it takes this webhook receiving thing and takes it to the next level, where you've now got, if you've heard of message brokers or message queues, that's what this is. It's an implementation of PubSub, another way to say it, inside of FileMaker. And so that's where these channels are. So in simple terms, you put a simple queue file on your server, you put all your webhooks go to that, and it manages which files get the messages. And it also enables the files to talk to each other by posting messages to simple queue. And then you can subscribe other FileMaker scripts to those messages. It can make, each channel can have many listeners, and those listeners can be scripts inside of many FileMaker files. And so in this case, where we were looking at, students, maybe you have 3 systems on your FileMaker server that need to get a message when a new WashU student signs up or whatever. Simple queue will give you a way to manage that. The webhook comes into one place, and then you subscribe 3 other scripts in 3 different files to each deal with that payload in a different way. And that's pretty cool.
I can give you an example of how performant that is, because traditionally, if a single file wanted to do a call to 3 other files, when FileMaker Server opens or launches that, it has to open all the other associated files
Right.
with that. Now I just pitch the payload over the fence, and that other file picks it up and carries it on.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to come back and inform me or do anything extra. It's just the data's there.
Yep. And that's I'll flesh that out a little bit if to make a little more sense of that, because I think it's a new pattern. We've been using it for a couple of years, and it's been fantastic. I mean, like millions of messages going through this system and just being handled, and with it's very simple to, once you understand the few key rules, it's very simple to manage. But the main thing is when a webhook comes in, or in fact, SimpleQ doesn't care about webhooks. It's like one of the things it can do is take a webhook, but can also just take a script call from any other file. Just here's a bunch of payload. You give it a channel and you give it a payload, and SimpleQ can handle it from there. And it doesn't actually process anything. It just receives the message, says, we got it. We've got it in our inbox here. You're good. You can rest assured that we are going to deliver this message to the other systems within a minute. Well, usually, what it is, because how it works is on the server, there's a file on the server. There's a script schedule that runs every minute that looks for unprocessed messages, and it processes them. So they're all processed on the server, which means they're all just quickly opening, doing the things they need to do, and closing. The client never has to deal with it. So it's a way of offloading. People use it for all kinds of things, including like sometimes you might write a PSOS script just to get that data processing off the client. So you would write that script and you would, and then you would call it. SimpleQ just kind of builds on an infrastructure to say, we'll do the PSOS for you. Just send the data to a channel. The channel will decide what scripts get it, and they'll run on the server. I think there might be a podcast coming up on this because it's a pretty powerful pattern, and it enables a lot of things that are just a pain to do. Again, a FileMaker server should be able to handle messages in this asynchronous way without having to do a lot of infrastructure work to get that to set up.
So one of the things we've implemented was we've had like the FileMaker, when you can run the thing automatically in SimpleQ, we've modified it so that it can actually fall back to the queue if the main files are offline.
That's right.
If we're actually doing a migration, so that all the webhooks that have come in can actually be picked up when the files come back live and be processed. And that's fantastic.
Yeah. So if for some reason a script can't be run, it knows, it can tell the difference, and you can teach it to be even smarter, but it can tell the difference. Like it'll know if it, let's say a script runs and it gets a 302 error, which is a record lock. It knows that that's not a permanent failure. That's a transient error. And the next time the queue flush on the server happens, it's just going to try again. And so there's a series of errors that are transient, and file closed or file missing is one of them. If the file is closed, then it might be open the next time the queue runs. So it'll just process it the next time. 200, but other errors that are permanent, like maybe field missing, is likely a permanent issue, like you've broken something. And so it'll error, and that script will not run, and you'll have to debug that. You'll have to find the errors and to debug it and fix it.
Yeah, I found that we are leaving SimpleQ on and running and turning off other files when we're doing our migration, so that it can still sit there and collect all the data that needs to be.
It's a good use case. There's a lot there. We should do another big talk on it at some point, because it's really powerful. This decoupling, allowing applications that don't have to be, so tightly integrated with file references and lots of cross cross manipulation. Sometimes, they only need to, one system may only need a subset of the data from the other system. And so having a way just to make that really easy to transfer that data back and forth is a big deal.
Do you think in a next version or a newer version, the Otto or the simple queue will support dynamic file references, since it's really hard to migrate that?
It is. So we looked at this. It's pretty challenging to do without there being some kind of manual manipulation.
So I know that the elemental log that Daniel Wood has out has all at least 30 some references by $ variable, double $.
Yeah.
So that I was looking at that to see if I could hack it together and contribute.
Yeah, we looked at this pretty hard. We looked at a couple things. Part of the problem is that if the file is opened by some other means, by being opened by some other file, prior to the particular script that gets called that opens that file using a dynamic file reference, the reference is broken. And it won't clear until you basically start a whole new script session. So what you'd have to do is every time the script queue runs, you would have to basically close all files and then reopen all files, whether you need them or not, with dynamic file references before you do anything. Otherwise, they're going to get open broken, or they could get open broken. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
It's pretty hard. We looked at it and we decided that we couldn't get it to the point where we could make it 100%. And so we said, it's not worth it. We're going to stick with manual file references for now. And yes, it's a problem. We're going to try to make it so that it's easier to catch. Maybe it doesn't work until you've, established those references or something. I'm not sure, but we'll look at trying to make it more obvious that you need to, when you do a migration, you need to add back your external file references.
It's one of those things that would be great to be able to patch.
Yes, that's true. Actually, I should look at that. It might be able to patch. The patch tool doesn't work very well, but it does do some things. I haven't actually tried to patch file references, but I should look at that.
I haven't looked, but I think there was a FM Disk meeting recently where someone was sharing some progress on that. It's just I think it's just the documentation is really lacking, so to say. So
well, it doesn't actually do everything. Even though the documentation, there's some things it doesn't do. I know it does custom functions fairly well, and so you could work out custom functions. But I haven't actually looked at file references, and that would be actually really useful to do. Yes. I mean, even just thinking about that dynamic, we were talking about the single server data migrations. If we could patch the file references when you change the names,
absolutely,
that would be pretty great.
And structure-wise, they're not the most complex object.
They're not complex, so I need to look at that. That would be great, and we would just build that into Otto. So Otto would that binary. Well, yeah, the files are already closed. They're already sitting on the disk. So if we have the data migration tool, if we have the patch tool there, and we have the patch file, and we should be able to apply it before we reopen it.
So I would suggest one thing for the next version, even in the Otto dialog or console or something like that. Just like I can create a simple webhook with shortcuts or something like that. If there was a way to create a sample payload and the URL that it's going to be targeting, so that a dev could hit the button repeatedly and test what's going in and its output and stuff like that.
We do have that in, when you make a new channel, you can enter your Otto URL. It's got a little pop-up dialog. In the latest version of SimpleQ, you can do that, where you make a new channel, you put in your URL, you put in your API key, and it will actually construct the URL for you to copy, and it will give you a place to test it right away.
Yes, I've used that many times.
Yeah. But yeah, I get it. Maybe in the auto console, doing that. We'll see. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Could you
Because
explain a little?
that's the thing. People always, they don't quite get the URL right. They don't know what's happening and things like that.
Can you explain two things on how do you call the URL in simple queue from another file without having to use the API thing at all? Like just to perform a script?
Yeah, so we're using perform script by name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Perform script by name. There is a syntax you can use that is, basically file name : script name.
Got it. But you have to
That's what we're
create a reference to the file that you're calling that.
You do.
Yes.
That's right.
Got it.
That's right. The file reference is actually the thing you have to file reference : script name is how it works.
Got it. And just one more on Otto itself, what is the port required for the schedule?
The scheduling is the data API. I'm sorry, the admin.
No, not the schedule, but the calendar subscription.
Oh gosh, that's port 3030.
Okay.
I will tell you, we're probably going to kill the calendar.
Okay, I never used it because I couldn't get it to work.
So
our firewalls didn't allow us to get it to work. Yeah,
it's a funny thing. So it's got this. It's here. It's configure, and if you can actually set it up. You can get, like a calendar subscription link.
Yeah.
Turn it on, and it will give you the dates and times of all your migrations. So initially, when Otto first was developed, the data migration tool had a little bit of a restrictive license. It basically said you couldn't just ship something with the data migration tool. It had to do more than that. So we added things like calendar subscriptions and these other things to kind of say data migration is only one of the things that it does, and it's not only about data migration. That license is now, it's now on the server. So there's no reason to have features that are, kind of silly. I mean, we added it to have more things that we could say.
$99 paywall.
What's that?
It was a $99 paywall.
Yeah, exactly. And you had to, in order to install the data migration tool on server, which we thought was really important, you had to do more than just data migration. So, we had offsite backups, we had calendar, we had, we had other things that you could do to the server. And then we started adding things that were, offsite backups are obviously really useful, but then we started adding webhook receivers. There's a ton of other features. It does, I didn't have a chance to go into all the different things, but Google OAuth for groups we can do. Connecting to application logging is pretty cool. There's a lot of other things. But the calendar is probably not going to make it to Otto v4. I'm not aware of one other person who's ever enabled it besides me. So
other than that, would you have a way to visualize all your server schedules in some kind
that is something we're looking at.
Cool.
Yeah. Because I think it's actually super useful. There's two problems. One, you don't know when schedules overlap. And that could be a real problem because you have scripts that require, you've got things in different states that are happening. If you're doing a lot of scheduled scripts, it's really useful to know when those scripts are running, like on a calendar, so you can see it.
Yeah, some fail instantly. Some could take 10 minutes. We don't know. Yeah,
you don't know, right? And so obviously we know when things start. That's easy. We don't know when the schedule itself tells us when it starts. So that's just looking at the data API and figuring out, showing that on a calendar. I'm sorry, the admin API, get the list of schedules, turn it into a calendar subscription, show it in some component, React calendar component that'll show that. The hard part is when they end, because the only way we can know when they end is by actually tailing the log. We'd have to see when the schedule actually completed. But I think that's really important. So we could actually tell you that on Thursday, your script took 2 hours, but the next Thursday it only took 30 minutes. That would actually be super useful to know. I think we can do it, but we haven't really even prototyped it, but that is on one of the things on the list.
I have another question, Todd,
Sure.
about a workflow, because like you've talked about workflows where we have dev and prod and everything can be brought down to that, and I'm sure it does it. It's just I didn't get to play with it to see it done. Is something where there's, say, dev, staging, and prod. Okay, and when we replace staging with the code from dev.
Yep.
But with the data from prod, not the
Yep.
data from staging.
Yeah. So this is surprisingly challenging to do. So the way it works, and the reason is, again, because in order to do that, you're moving data. That's the problem. So when you move data, if your files are big, it is going to take a long time. And that's the issue there. But, and also you're making a copy of that data on your production server, which again, if you've got a heavy production server that's running real hard and you've got a big file, making that copy is going to actually impact the server. It'll suck up a CPU. And if there's a lot of people on that server, it could take a long time to make that copy. So that's the challenge there. But the basic model is, if you're given, let's just take the simplest case of not a lot of data, you would do a data migration and to production, and then pull copies of the production files back to staging. That's kind of how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you are pulling that production data back, which means you're having to deal with all that. And the other problem is that we don't have an automated way to do external container data yet. We're looking at how to make that better with Otto v4. But again, the challenge is the amount of data that you're moving can be quite high. And so how do you move that effectively is we're looking at things like rsync to do those kinds of large container file syncs. And that's what people do when they really want this, is they'll set up rsync between their container data, their container folders, and then just pull copies of the files back. But it's not as smooth as we would like right now.
Assuming you've gone to the cloud for most of your container storage, like Wasabi or S3 or something like that, and it's just URLs stored in the records, that's less of a problem.
Yep.
Now you have another problem of making sure that your delete scripts don't delete real production data, because you have production data URLs that could delete the real data. So that's the developer stuff has to come in.
Yeah. There's a lot here. Unfortunately, like the problems get more complicated around staging when you have issues like sensitive data, because maybe you don't want sensitive data on there. So there's a process which we have not figured out how to automate super well yet, which is, it's probably more like you want a cleaned set of production data on your staging server, but not the production data. How do we do that?
And then how often do you actually reseed development data? Because it's like, you don't have nothing with new dates. How do you really test your find scripts?
Yeah, same issue. How do you get, because you probably don't want, or at least in some use cases, there's a lot of data on production that you just wouldn't want developers to be on your developer server. I mean, one of the nice things we get here is, as far as security, and this can help in certain security sensitive environments, where because Otto can switch accounts, so your dev accounts can be full access dev, but those don't flow to production. Production accounts can be just OAuth, for example, and maybe one full access secret account. And those accounts on production don't have access to scripts or data.
But that gets tricky when you're trying to redevelop who has access to your data, depending on the source of how they're authenticating. We had an issue today where we had to change if people were coming in with a certain, like their lowercase username and password, which is OAuth data, or not OAuth, it's external authentication. Their first and last name wasn't properly cased, so I couldn't get their email address from their email table. So it was like, oh, yeah, it gets worse.
Yeah, there are issues. We're working on anything that we can do to streamline that process. We will try to do. We are way over time here, and I don't want to
Fantastic stuff.
blabbing on here, but I really appreciate all the time and interest in what we're doing here. And you know, our goal around Otto and Automatic is to make FileMaker developers' lives much easier, and we're doing everything we can to empower that, because we think that's how we make the platform stay more relevant and allow us to work faster and solve our clients' problems better. And you know, ultimately, this is really about adding what we think is necessary to the FileMaker server to make it really perform, to really do what we need to do in this modern environment.
It makes FileMaker relevant for this day and age because everything is interconnected and we need it.
Yep, we do.
Well, Todd, thank you very much for your time tonight, and I appreciate the product that you've put out here. I'm sure, as you can tell by going over, this is probably our longest meetup ever, which is a good thing. We have another meetup coming up next month. Our regular monthly meetup will be on Tuesday, May 16th. Same time, same place, 6 p.m. Central. There's a really good chance that Skeleton Key will be presenting that evening on PS PDF Kit. It's been a product that we've been working on for quite a while. And so stay tuned. Hope to announce that possibly later this week. Please RSVP when you hear about it, and look for the recording on YouTube in case you missed something or want to hear something again. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks very much. Y'all have a good evening. See you in Austin, maybe.